Can you talk into the mic?
I am a little soft-spoken, yeah.
So we're gonna crank up your mic.
Okay.
Hey, welcome. This is Marty Cappelle. Welcome to the Play Life Differently podcast. This is our first episode, and you might be wondering, why would I even want to do a podcast, right? And you might be saying, well, who am I talking to, and what's in it for you? And I'm going to answer those three questions today, being our first episode, and we'll cover lots of topics, and it'll evolve over time. That's true to the mantra of Play Life Differently. So let me start by just why would I even do this? And I had a lot of second, third, fourth, fifth guesses about why I would even do this. And what I came to realize is, over the last couple of years, we've been talking a lot with, friends, colleagues in my circle, just, how we're being more intentional about life and, getting what we really want out of life. And so, I also then came up with the term Play Life Differently. And so I thought, well, I don't know if anybody's going to listen or watch. Like that's up to you. But I thought at the end of the day, there's probably some really great stories, some people, I know that we'll invite on the show and we'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly about living life. And, life is freaking hard. It's not easy. And I think most of us, are struggling with social media and career pressures and family pressures and the roles we're supposed to be in our lives. And I think there's a big need for, helping people find out who they truly are. And so why do it? I think there's got to be a forum. There's got to be a place where people can go to and they can listen and maybe there's one idea or a few ideas or multiple ideas, over the course of different conversation shows that we do where you think like, hey, that resonates with me. I had something similar, and so why me though? Like why I thought, as I said, like I had some trepidation about even doing something like this, thought about it for a long time. And I'll share like none of my decisions, while they might seem to the outside world that they're impulsive, and I'll give you examples of that. The reality is I've thought about those decisions long before I've ever taken action, and I've just kind of kept them to myself. And so what makes me qualified? Why would somebody listen to me? And to be honest, I don't know the answer for you. Like if you're listening to this, I don't know why why you would listen, right? Other than the fact that I think there's going to be some great stories. There's going to be some key comments that I think over time might resonate. And if it does, it helps you change your motivation, helps you find out who you are, helps you find out, live a more authentic and intentional life. Then this is the podcast for you. And as it grows, the Play Life Differently podcast will likely evolve into new content, but it'll always stay true to play life differently. And that's why we're doing it. If we can share a few things and touch a few folks, that's the hope. And I don't know if my life means anything to anybody other than maybe my kids, but my family and friends. But, in the greater world, I'm hoping that you find a little something here and share it and keep tuning in. But the purpose of Play Life Differently, the tagline that I came up with a number of years ago, I was thinking about all the things that have happened in my life and relative to the couple of businesses that I manage and run and own. And I thought, I'm kind of done being what everybody else wants me to be. And it took a long time, a couple of decades to come to that conclusion. It happened, kind of in my 40s. And, you don't really know what you want in your teenage and 20 years and even your 30s. And so I have a playful nature about who I am. And so I take myself not that seriously, but I take the things that I do seriously, the things that I am involved in seriously. But I always have an element of fun around those things. So I don't ever want to do anything that's so stressful and burdensome that, that it's not play anymore. It becomes work. And so the things that I do in my life today, the businesses I manage, they're fun. And we'll talk more about what that means in terms of like doing the things that you have to do to make those businesses successful, or your businesses or your work life in your world successful. But if you have a mindset of a playfulness mindset to it, it becomes a lot more enjoyable for you, but also the people in that space for you. So that's the word play. And then life, right? So life is an evolution. It's not an end game. And you're always constantly developing and growing, and you should be. And that's the things we're going to talk about: growth mindedness, intentional, actions and mindsets and being authentic. So we'll talk about the values of play life differently as well. And then the word differently, just specifically, like, you don't have to be like everybody else. There's so much pressure from work conformity. You got to do this, you got to act like this, you got to produce like this, to family life, whatever the role is, mother, father, kids, parents, grandparents, right? Everybody has expectations on you. And so being different means, in play life differently, it truly means being unique and being yourself. And that's what this is about. So you're going to be unique, be yourself. You're going to enjoy life, have fun. You're going to play life, and you're going to do it the way you see fit. But it's a path of self-discovery. So we're going to address a lot of stories and challenges and successes. And that's what Play Life Differently is about. So who it speaks to, my hope is that it speaks to a lot of people. I think everybody goes through life, successful, unsuccessful people, whatever you want to frame it as. But I think everybody has their own life and their own history and experiences. And I think there's elements of this podcast that could touch just about everybody. As we go through each podcast, each episode, new guests, new concepts, I think people will, might resonate with that. And I don't know if there's anybody that, wouldn't relate in some way. Maybe they've already accomplished that and experienced that specifically, and that's great for them, but at least they relate to it. And so I think it could really speak to just about anybody that wants to listen. And what I hope that the viewers and the listeners all get out of this is that there's something that resonates so deeply with you that your life changes for the better. And so I've had many of those moments over my lifetime, and I have a lot to still experience, and we'll share those as they come. But I really just hope that there's one or two things that maybe you hadn't heard, or their perspective on a particular, experience sheds a little bit of light. The reality is you can have one situation in 100 people, and they're all going to perceive it differently. And so, if we've got some experiences and stories that we share that help you experience it a little bit differently, right? Then you get to start playing your life a little bit differently. And maybe that difference, that different perspective, allows you to start to see the world through that view, because that's more authentically who you are. And so that's the purpose. That's who we hope to help, and hopefully the results of all that. So welcome to the Play Life Differently podcast. So let me begin kind of the first episode with just some things that I've noticed, patterns in experiences I've had over the handful of years. And I have many, many stories I can share over our time together. But I think over the last couple of years, it's become more apparent as I've coined the mantra Play Life Differently, and as I've had more successes and less failures. And I think there's an evolution in life when you get out and you start, right? None of us really know what we're doing, and we've got mentors and parents and things to help us along the way, to help guide us. But at some point, you've got to take ownership for your own life, and inevitably you have more failures than successes. But as time goes on and you learn from those failures, you start to have more successes than failures. The balance of that starts to tip. And so that's happened to me the last couple of years. And so what I hope to impart or give some backdrop to, right, is some of those more recent experiences. And I'll tell you, I'm going to give some examples of the first things that kind of come to mind. And I think the biggest piece is like authenticity. It's probably the piece that gets me the most excited in life emotionally, when people are truly genuine and authentic, and me too, or they're the complete opposite, right? They're posers, they're characters, they're not really who they are. And you know them, right? And you're just kind of like, well, that was out of character. Like, why'd they say that? Why'd they act like that? And whether it's work pressures, peer pressures, family pressures, it doesn't really matter, right? But like, what causes people to choose the path of inauthenticity versus authenticity? And so that's what I want to talk about. So there's so many examples. I can give you a couple. I won't name names, but I travel a lot. I play golf a lot. I'm a lot of like networking circles, golfing circles. And it's always interesting to me because I've never been a work the crowd kind of guy. It's just not in me. I don't want to work a room. I don't need a million best friends. And so I have a very close circle, and there's sayings that say like, hey, you are the product of your 5 closest friends, and then everybody else is just there. But if you've ever noticed, there are those people that have, 20, 30 best friends. But what's interesting is if you get that person alone and you have a one-on-one conversation and you start talking about life and you start talking about the things that they're struggling with or the things that they're proud of, what they talk about in that one-on-one moment is vastly different than the way they act and show up in a group setting. So like, why is that? And I think it has to do with peer pressures and social settings and, peer groups that they're trying to be a part of. And I just have never subscribed to that. And for a long time in my life, I have felt like the outsider when I've been in those group environments. And a couple of years ago, I just decided to kind of own it. Like, just accept the fact that like, I'm not the center of attention. I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't need to be the life of the party or the koa, right? The center of attention. And so, and because of that, I'm not the life of the party. I also spend a lot of time observing in social settings. I'm very quiet. I can certainly engage one-on-one and in a 3 or 4 person conversation over a cocktail, like totally engaged and active and present in that moment. But in the greater picture, when I just kind of sit back in those environments and watch people, I'm so just disappointed in the people that I know from across the room that are pretending to be people that they're not, in my opinion, right? And this is just my opinion, so I'm not here to offend anybody, but they have their own reasons for stating things a certain way, acting a certain way, whatever, and that's fine. But I just one-on-one, I find people so interesting. And I find at the heart of the matter, one-on-one, people just want to be loved and to love. That's the basics, right? And most people are willing to help. And I've noticed too that when you get into those one-on-ones and you end up having deep conversations, like really deep, meaningful, emotional conversations, sharing, peeling back the layers of the onion and just kind of sharing their soul a little bit, good and bad, right? That they just want to experience life a little bit that way. So what's interesting about that is like I can have those one-on-one conversations, and then maybe that person in a larger group setting is acting a little bit out of the character that they presented when they were one-on-one with me. But what's interesting, there are then those folks where I've had one-on-one and they're the same non-authentic person, right? And I started to think about like, well, like why the hell is that? Like why is one person? There are 3 types, right? There's those that are authentic, one-on-one, and in a group setting. They never change, right? They're very consistent, and that's phenomenal. And then there's those that are authentic one-on-one, and then in a group setting, they're not, right? They're trying to impress or be something they're not, or trying to fit in. And then there's the third group, which are never authentic one-on-one or in a group setting. And so I was just like, well, that's so interesting. What does that mean? And so why is that? Why are these 3 distinct groups? And I don't have the answer to the third group, but I have the answer to the first group. And the answer to the first group is that they just know very intimately who they are. You could give them a scenario and a situation where they've got to make a decision and as a what if situation, and they could tell you exactly how they would act and respond. And they would be true to that, whether individually or in a group. And that's because they know their beliefs, they know their values, they know deep down who they are, right? And so this podcast is all about what does it take to go from the third group to the first group, right? If you're struggling with that, if you're trying to understand, like, I understand why things are happening to me, right? Versus making them happen, then this might be the podcast for you, right? And I think a lot of it is peer pressure. A lot of it is, not wanting to disappoint others. And there's a whole slew of probably reasons for that. I can relate to that. I used to do some of that a long time ago. And I just, I've just decided that doesn't make me happy, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to win approval for maybe peer groups or people in a network that I really have nothing in common with. And so I'm like, well, life's too short. And there are so many examples of life being too short that I want to spend the rest of my life around people that know who they are, know what they want. They don't know they have to know how to get there, but they know exactly who they are, their beliefs, their values. and they're just going to play their own lives differently to the tune of their own values and beliefs. And that's what this is about. And so we're going to share stories all about that. So let's start a little bit with just maybe my own life as a couple examples. So my life hasn't been roses and easy, and it's not been handed to me. And so I think when some people see successful people or feel like that person's got it all put together, how do they accomplish so much, and all of these things that they might see on the outside, I guarantee you that person has had more struggles than you could probably even listen to if they were to tell their life story. And so for me, that's very true. And so I will tell you, I grew up in a middle-class family, and we didn't have everything we wanted. You see some Bulls stuff behind me. I'm a big Jordan and Bulls fan, and I played basketball. And an example, like I didn't have everything. All the kids were getting Air Jordans to play on basketball team, and I was a starter in grade school and high school, and we just couldn't afford them. And you might think, well, today that's not a big deal, right? But back in the late '80s and early '90s, spending $120 on a pair of Air Jordans just to fit in wasn't in the cards. So I got my shoes from Venture, right? So, Venture was the store we went to for clothes, and I didn't get the name brand pants and all that stuff. We just didn't have the means to do that. So it was very much a humble start, because at the end of the day, the things that were important were family and working hard and, just kind of surviving with the family. One example, that's where it started. But in that, there was a work ethic that was instilled. And my mom worked 2 jobs. My dad worked a lot. And when he wasn't working, he was home working on the house because they couldn't afford contractors to do the work. So he did it, and the kids helped him do it on weekends. And that went on for years. And so everything they made was kind of, they made it their own. So they taught me that hard work gets them to the things that they wanted for their own lives, right? And they didn't have to rely on others to do that. So that's about where it started. But over my life, there's been many, many more examples. And, one of the biggest vulnerable parts of my life was, I met my wife in college. We fell in love. We got married right away, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're too young. You're getting married right out of college." And the reality is, that's what I wanted to do. I had always seen myself with my dad as a role model, being a husband and a father, and my parents' relationship was really good, and so I wanted that. And so I thought, well, that's the right step. When you find someone, that's what you do. You get married, you have kids, and you start a life, and you'll figure it out. And the relationship lasted about 7 years, and we had 2 beautiful girls, and then it disintegrated. It fell apart, right? And I'm not going to get into whose fault it was. The reality is, in any marriage, it's both people's faults, right? They both contribute to it. They both have to work at it, and I didn't know what that meant, working at a relationship. And so there was a lot of resentment and hatred and hurt feelings, and quite honestly, my identity was destroyed in that moment. When I realized this isn't going to work out. And I became probably clinically depressed, and for a couple years, but I had 2 beautiful little girls that I had to step up and be a father to. And so, I think when I think about that today and the successes and who my daughters are today and who I've become as a father today is vastly different than what I was 20 years ago or 18 years ago when I was going through that. And it's been an 18, 20-year process of learning how to be a good dad. And so what I've learned from that is that I don't necessarily need to beat myself up about my behaviors and the way I disengaged as a father, but I need to learn from that. And so, getting the help that I needed, counseling, therapy, all of that was the right thing to do. I couldn't do it on my own. My family couldn't help me in that regard because they had never been through it. I was the first one to get divorced. And so, they were you get loads of advice from your friends and your family about how to handle it and just, buckle up and just get to work and take care of the kids and take them to, activities and school and all, do their homework with them. All these things, they're giving me all this advice, but the reality is emotionally, I just wasn't prepared for that advice. I didn't know how to handle it. And so I got to a point where I just, for some reason, something clicked. I'm like, these aren't the people that can help me through this. I need to get professional help, see an outside perspective from somebody that's emotionally unattached to the family environment. And that's when life started to change. And so I would tell you, if you're struggling with things like that, it's you don't have to solely rely on the people in your world, because your people in your world have a perspective. They're going to give you advice from their perspective, from their experiences in that relationship. And the reality is it's not unbiased. It's completely biased. And so, and while it's coming from places of love and support, and maybe they're actually right when they make some advice comments, but like they're too emotionally attached because they're in the situation. And so that's how I felt. And so I sought that help outside. And what I learned from that was that there's so much more that I could be doing for myself first and my kids second. And so it came to a point where I was like, I have to be the person I want to be so that I can be the good father that they deserve. So it wasn't the other way around. Like I wasn't going to just be a good father for the sake of being a good father. I had to like work on myself. I had to figure out my faults, my failings. I had to go through the pain of talking about examples of what I did, what I said, how I was like not, a good person in those moments, and accept the fact that like I wasn't perfect. And here's a newsflash: nobody's perfect, right? It's just, you're just not, right? But you're also not like everybody else. So you're different and you're unique. And so I think, and I'm just being vulnerable. Like that was a really hard, 5 to 7 years of my life, and managed to get through it. And that was kind of the first step, was fixing the perspective and the lens through which I saw myself, because I was beating myself up thinking I was a bad dad. I was beating myself up thinking I wasn't a provider by working hard. I was beating myself up because I wasn't a good sibling or son. And so every day, every moment of every day for 5 to 7 years, it was how much I was failing. And I couldn't get through that by turning to the advice of people that were already in my world, because I was trying to get advice from people that I felt I was failing. So I had to get a third party, unattached advice and source. So that's a big part. So that began the self-discovery process for me of playing life differently and finding out who I am. What did I really value? And what I learned was like integrity was a big value of mine. Being authentic and genuine was a big value. And so I was constantly getting questioned by my therapist about, well, why'd you do that? That seems contradictory to, what you said earlier, which is you value this. And we would have to talk about that. And there were moments of tears and, being angry and just massively frustrated with myself, not with the therapist questioning me, just pulling out the values of who I thought I was. I would say one thing and do another, which is the complete opposite of integrity. But I would say, like, I'm integrity, right? I do what I say. And then she'd be like, are you sure? Are you really sure you're doing what you're saying? Because you just said this story. And I was like, right? Like, yeah, you're right. I'm not. So guess I'm speaking and I'm not really doing it. Right. So that was like very eye-opening to be called to the carpet. And by the way, I'm paying for it. Right. It's not even a friend telling me that. Like, I'm literally handing over money twice a week to have someone tell me I'm being an ass. Right. So, so again, that was just kind of the start of it. And so if I fast forward to that, and then I go back to the comments of like, there's these 3 types of people, I get being that third person, right? Not being authentic, not being genuine, not being intentional or living with integrity and acting a certain way to impress or because others have expectations on you, right? And so I then learned, because I lived it, and I was still having some of these expectations set on me as I was coming out of that, as I was healing and getting better. I had this thought to me that expectations really only work if both people agree, right? So I've been saying that for probably 15 years. So if we are talking about something and then we disagree and you're like, well, you said this, or you did that, or you said you were going to do this, or you said this, right? All these things. And I would stop and look like, well, one, we didn't talk about that. I didn't know that was your expectation of me. Had I known, we would have talked about that, because I never would have agreed to that. right? And so I came up with this saying like, expectations only work if both people agree, right? So it was less about the other person's reaction in the moment of the disagreement. It was more of mine, right? Like if somebody didn't do something I thought they should have done, I would stop myself like, well, did we talk about that? Or did I just subconsciously expect that of them? And the moment I thought of that, I was like, well, shit, how can I really be freaking pissed? Like they had no idea that was the expectation I had. And so I became being a better communicator, right? Of the outcomes, right? Of doing this or an event there or what, or the results of something, so clearly defining expectations between all parties involved and getting agreement and alignment on those, or you change the expectation till everybody's in alignment, right? Then you can be pissed if we miss the expectation, right? So it's like, I would, a couple of people would do it. And I'd start saying like, well, expectations only work if we both agree, so I don't know why you're pissed. I didn't agree to that. And it just is so disarming. like, well, but, and I'm like, no, like you're assuming that's what I meant, or that was what I was going to do. But I never actually agreed to that because we never talked about it. Had I known and had I agreed, then you would have the right to be pissed if I failed. But because we never agreed, like what right do you have to be pissed? And vice versa, right? And so I started just using it in my own world. So I couldn't be mad at someone on the team. I couldn't be mad at my family. I could, like, if they don't know the expectation, like, well, you just should have known. Like, and there's that old saying, like, assuming makes an ass out of you and me, right? Don't assume, like, there's a reason that phrase is there, right? So expectations are a big part. And it's not just expectations of others, it's expectations of yourself, right? So if you have an expectation to live a certain way, unless you truly believe and commit to that expectation to yourself, how do you really get upset if you fail at it? And so that's also play life differently, right? I set goals for myself, but they're realistic goals. I actually believe and want those things, right? And so if I believe and want those things, and that's then becomes the expectation, then it's clear in my mind what I need to do to make it happen, right? And if I don't make it happen or it falls short, at least I can look back and say, well, I can understand why. There were certain circumstances or actions I didn't or did take, and I can map that out. But expectations is a big one when it comes to relationships, particularly with yourself. And so play life differently is all about understanding who you want to become, who you are, what are your expectations for yourself and your life and your loved ones, and doing it in a way that is crystal clear. And maybe it's not today, and maybe this podcast will help you with that. But I think, playing life differently with clear expectations and intentions and authenticity, will set you on the path to your life changing almost on a dime. In my experience, it's been an evolution of kind of self-discovery to understand what was happening. But when I became really intentional about the expectations, about the authenticity, about the intention of things, my life skyrocketed in ways I couldn't even imagine. The people I've met, the work that I've got to do, the influence I've got to have within the people in my reach. So, there's nothing more maddening to me than observing people that place expectations on others that they have known nothing about or not being authentic. And so I hope we uncover some stories and get real with some examples of, maybe you'll relate to some of these things. And then, we can talk about how do you navigate those things? How do we navigate some of those things to get there? And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a constant growth minded, perspective. And so we're going to talk about those things on this podcast. So for you that are watching, I think there's a couple things that I'm going to share with you, and I'm just going to list them off that can help you on this path to self-discovery, playing life differently. And here they are. The first thing that I always practice is gratitude. It's a belief, it's a value. And what that practice of gratitude looks like to me is taking a few minutes every night before bed, in the morning for sure, and then throughout the day. It's a constant muscle I flex for myself where I just stop and think about the things that I'm grateful for. And they're usually things in the moment on the things I'm struggling. So if it's a problem with work or a colleague that that I got to think through, I take a few minutes and talk, and to myself, I'll either write it down or I'll say it in my head, I'm grateful that I'm in this career. I'm grateful that I get to impact clients. I'm grateful that I've got, E9 Club that provides a place where people can play golf. Like, so gratitude is number one. If you don't start your problems with gratitude, the problems become bigger problems. So the first thing I always do is find my means of practicing gratitude. So it's journaling, it's thoughts, it's prayer. And there's a lot of books and podcasts and gurus on the practice of gratitude, but gratitude hands down changes your perspective in the moment. And you can't be pissed off or sad or depressed at the same time that you're grateful. And so those moments in life where things get hard, just quieting your mind and just being grateful, the fact that you're even alive, like that's a basic one. So if you can't think of anything else, just be grateful that you're breathing and you have the ability to have that thought that you're breathing. So that's at a very basic. So that's the first thing I would do. The second key thing about playing life differently is being thoughtful. So there's nothing that I do now that isn't thoughtful. There's no action I take. There's no words I speak that aren't thoughtful. And it's always with the intent of relaying a message or getting something done or providing a result. So, whether it's, offering to bring a plate from the counter to the table for my daughter, like that's thoughtful, right? I could have said, get up and get it yourself, but I don't, right? And so the opportunity for me to serve her for 2 seconds to walk the dinner plate from the counter to her place at the table because she asked is it's thoughtful. And that, and you might say, well, that's second nature. I would just do that anyway. But do you? And so I've taken even the minute decisions or thoughts to a very conscious, thoughtful, and intentional level. And that takes practice. That takes work. It doesn't happen overnight. So if you want to change your life, you have to bring the decisions and the actions you take, even as minute as they may seem, and make them thoughtful. So that's the second one. The third one I would say is seek resources. And so this podcast might be a resource for you, right? We're going to talk about a lot of things over time, but seek resources because I firmly believe I don't know what I don't know. And so I can't say I know everything, and I can't say even the things that I do know, I don't know everything about them. So there's got to be things I don't even know, and I know zero about them. So seek resources. So whether it's a therapist, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a friend that's a mentor, it doesn't really matter the source. Find resources, right? You can't be afraid to have humility and accept the fact that you don't know things, because if you don't, then you're ignorant and you're arrogant at the same time. And that's the worst combination. And that just leads to like devastation, right? And so having some humility and seeking resources in whatever manner you receive them open-mindedly is that third point. The fourth I would tell you is find your mode to work the problems out, work the betterment of yourself out. For me, it's journaling, right? For you, it might be reading. For you, it might be quiet time on a nature walk. It doesn't really matter, right? But find the mode where you are ingraining who you want to become in a place that you can constantly go back to so that you can look at how far you've come. If you haven't captured where you were, you have no reality of where you are today and how far you've come. So for me, that's journaling. I can look back at journals from 10 years ago and be like, holy shit, I thought that? Oh my God, I would never think that today. Why? Because it's negative, it's destructive, it's devastating, it's sad. And so for me, that's journaling. But for you, if it's nature walks or podcasts or music, it doesn't really matter. But you got to take time to like put into like the universe your thoughts about who you want to become and where you've come from. So for me, that's journaling. And the fifth thing, and this is probably the most important thing, and there's a say is like, I think, therefore I am, right? And so thoughts control feelings, and then feelings get you to take actions, right? So it's thoughts, feelings, actions. And so if that's affirmations, people talk about positive affirmations all the time, right? And you speak about the present, future tense of yourself, even if you aren't there, right? I'm an amazing pianist, or I'm an amazing golfer, and I'm a scratch hand player. It doesn't really matter what the positive affirmation is, but you have to think positively, and they start with good thoughts. So I challenge my close friends and I challenge myself when anybody says like that can't be done or that's not the way it is. And I'm just like, well, why are you thinking like that? Like that's negative. Like what's the thought you have there? Let's talk about that. So what you think about feeds your subconscious, and your subconscious then feeds your feelings, and then your feelings are what motivates you to take action. Think about the time when you were the most excited. What did you do? Or you think about the time when you're most pissed off. How did you react, right? It was the feeling that got you to react. But what drove the feeling was a thought or a comment, right? So a comment happens or an action happens. It creates a thought. That thought then creates your feeling and you react. But if you could slow down that process from action and words to thoughts that you have about those action and words to then the feelings you feel about it, right? Then you can take the appropriate action and you don't have to ever regret how you reacted or responded. And so thoughts feed your subconscious, which feed your feelings, which then feed your actions. So those are the 5 things, right? So start with gratitude, be thoughtful, seek resources, find your mode for, going through your process of development, journaling as an example, right? And then work on your thoughts, right? And those 5 things. So if I can leave you with those today at the start of episode 1 of Play Life Differently, be well, play life differently. We'll see you next time.